Hi. So, yeah, as Steve mentioned, I'm Chris. I'm an SEO working at MacNaught Digital. It's a digital marketing agency based outside of Manchester. There's only about 6 of us there at the moment, so it's quite small, quite a tight group, which is pretty good. And funny story, about 2 years ago, I graduated with a master's degree in aerospace engineering. And then just decided to completely switch careers. Landed myself in SEO, and I absolutely loved it, which was good. Since then, cheers. Since then, I've sort of had the chance to gain a bit of experience in SEO. I've dipped my toes into all different types of SEO. I've tried a little bit of tech SEO, tried a bit of content marketing, and I've learned a lot of things along the way. And one of them is that link building is bloody hard, especially when you know that some of your competitors are buying links. But what are you going to do? Are you going to start buying links yourself? It's kind of a risky business, so probably not. You never know when some of those links might drop off the map. You never know when they might lead to you getting a Google penalty. So if you're looking to be able to rely on some of those links, then you kind of want to be building them in cleaner, more sustainable ways. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. 3 ways that you can start to build somewhat more Google-friendly-ish, cleaner links that you'll be able to rely on in the future. But first, let's start off with 3 inconvenient truths about link building. So first, as mentioned before, link building's bloody hard. If it's not difficult, you're probably not doing it right. It's also imperative. You need to be doing link building today. If you're not doing link building, you're probably not taking the full advantage. You're probably not ranking for some of the things that you should be. And perhaps most importantly, way too many SEOs rely solely on outreach for building their links, and there's so many other ways to do it. I don't know about you, but putting hours and hours of effort into building each single link seems rather inefficient. It works with, let's say, 10, 15 links, but then scaling it up to, let's say, 100 or 200 links just doesn't work. We don't have the man hours. So the 3 methods that I'm going to talk to you about today involve primarily creating assets that people want, need, or care about. And the idea with them is that you'll be able to create them, distribute them, and essentially give them a little bit of a nudge, a bit of a push, and after that, they'll then start to create links on their own. So the first method is Creative Commons image distribution. So for those of you that don't know, Creative Commons imagery is simply imagery that's licensed for use freely, generally. The only request, essentially, is that the user credits the author or the creator of the image. And it works because, well, when writers create their content or their articles, they usually need good, visually stunning images to essentially complement it. And some of the examples that we've managed to do is, so this is, for example, a link that we managed to build in a site for in a cryptocurrency site for one of our clients in the forex trading industry, and we simply created a bank of images focused around cryptocurrency, released them, and noticed that they started to get picked up in a few relevant sites. There's another example as well. So essentially, the way it works is writers and journalists again need these images to back up their content, but it's not always practical for them to go off and buy their own images, or let's say source royalty-free ones, or even go off and create their own ones. Sometimes they might not have the time, they might not have the resources, they might not have the budget. So instead what they do is they search for Creative Commons images. There's multiple ways of doing that. You can search through sites like Flickr and other bits and pieces, or alternatively what you can do is you can filter through Google searches, Google Images, for images labeled for reuse, and people might, writers and journalists might just grab some of those and use those in their content. So if they're writing about a topic that's relevant to your business or to your niche, then you can provide them with those images and get attribution links in the process. So it all starts out by identifying images that you might potentially, images that people want or need in your niche. Find out whether there's demand for them. So one of the ways to do this is simply to reverse image search images that are already available. Just grab them, reverse image search them, and see whether they're actually used a lot or not. If they are, you can start on creating alternative images, which you can then distribute to writers. A good source of inspiration for images like this is Unsplash, which is up and coming now. Or you can also use even sites like Shutterstock or Flickr. Just basically look through the images, see what's in use, and try to replicate similar things or try to create alternative versions. And most people kind of have the impression that you need to be doing this in a large photo studio with a professional camera and professional lighting. You don't. All you really need is the phone on your, the camera on your phone. If you wanted to sort of splash out and go big, you could even buy a light box. They cost about £5 on Amazon for small fold-up ones. Or you can go a little bit bigger and you can get some that are about 1 metre by 1 metre by 1 metre for about £100, filled with all professional lighting in it, and you can take all your stock photography in there. Anyway, so once you've created your images, you then need to distribute them. And Flickr's really good for this. So basically all you would do is you would create a Flickr account, make sure to change your default licensing to Creative Commons attribution so that when you're uploading your images, they're not tagged under the wrong licensing. And then basically upload them. You give them all titles and descriptions, which will actually become the titles and meta descriptions that Google uses to rank them. And they'll also contain all the content that users will be, all the keywords that users will be using to search for your images. So make sure to keyword optimize both the title and the meta description. And then we also add a little bit of text at the bottom of it that just asks that if people use the image to please credit the client's website or your website. And then basically what you do is you go off and you let them work their magic. Then you track the usage. So you can do it the manual way, which is using Google Images, just reverse image search images. Or alternatively, what you can do is you can use sites like tools like CopyTrack or Pixie, which, as far as I'm aware, they're both still free. Essentially, you just upload your images, and it will run the checks, match them to whatever's out in use, and it will basically tell you where your image is being used. You can then chase the attribution. Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, actually, it turns out people are pretty crap at attributing. So we analysed about 6,000 image usages and found that only about 5% of the time were they linking correctly. 50% of the time they actually linked to the Flickr page. About 20% of the time there was a mix between people mentioning the brand or people mentioning the Flickr page, but no link embedded. And 22% of the time there was no link at all. So there's a pretty good chance that essentially what you can do is provide those images, chase the attribution, but there's a pretty good chance that most people are going to steal your images anyway. You'll put up this piece of text that says, please credit the client, and they'll completely ignore it. So you've got to go back, you've got to contact them and ask them to either put in the link or update the one that they've already got. And there's a pretty good chance that people are already stealing your content. So you might have produced an image, a header image for your website. You might have produced a couple of images that you shared on social media. You never know. These sorts of images, you can check them, you can track their usages. You might be completely unaware of them, but you can go back and chase attribution for those as well. So the next method is using statistics and template pieces. So these two work both very well. The one I'm going to be focusing on today is statistic pieces. So essentially, they work because when journalists write about whatever topic they're writing about, they usually make claims, and they're going to need statistics and data to back those claims. So, as with images, you can collect the data, you can distribute it, provide it for them, and get attribution links in the process. So for example, this is one that we did last year for a client of ours that do home blood test kits. And basically we put together a stats piece focusing on stress statistics in the UK. So we ran a survey, surveyed 2,000 people, and found that 85% of those suffered from stress on a regular basis. This was strictly a UK survey. So we put it all together into one blog post, published it on the website, and no surprise, we didn't rank. So it was kind of expected. We were up against websites, for example, like the NHS, which are quite authoritative in the medical industry. So we started to build links using outreach, and over the first probably 2 to 3 months, we actively promoted the post, created anywhere between 20 and 30 links, and then after that we just cut off all active promotion and we just monitored. And over the next year and a half or so, it continued to build about 150 new links with no active promotion involved. So a way to do it is basically to start by researching any stats or data that might be missing from your industry, stats that you can provide. You might already have an idea about that. So for example, just about every website now has a blog. Every company website has a blog. You may have been trying to write a blog post about common knowledge in your industry. And a lot of the time it's the common knowledge that we don't actually have stats or data to back up. So you can sort of get an idea as to what data you can start to pull together, gather it and distribute it. So you'll also want to start looking for any relevant queries or keywords that they might use to search for that data. Just gives you an idea of how to structure the data itself. Then you've got to go off and collect your data. So you can use survey data sources, a little bit like, well, the one that we use most commonly is Google surveys. Though you can also use platforms like OnePoll, 3Gem, or Taluna. They all do pretty much the same thing. Some do it in different timelines, so some will take a week or two, some will take maybe 48 hours, and they'll all have varying prices as well. You can also consider freedom of information requests. So these, to an extent, are free. You'll essentially be able to request public data from, let's say, the UK government using what they do know. What do they know? Sorry. Or alternatively, you could look for EU data using asktheeu.org. Just a couple of things to mention with this. So, one, to an extent, it's free, though it may, if there is an extreme amount of time involved in gathering the data, then they may actually add a fee. The other thing to note is when you do use these platforms, the request is made. Once it's granted and your data is provided to you, you've got to bear in mind that it's actually published on their website as well. So it becomes public knowledge. You then are in charge of turning it around as quickly as you can and creating your stats piece. So you've gathered your data. All you need to do now is pretty much package it up into a blog post. Maybe try to present the data in a different way. So use interactives, use infographics, make it look more appealing to both the reader but also the writer. And then obviously you post it on your website, and as expected it probably won't rank. So you need to give it that first little nudge, get it seen. Start by pushing it through outreach. You can even use Google Ads just until it builds the first few links, and then once it's built those links, you can just watch it go off and build links on its own. This also works for non-proprietary data. So we don't actually have any link with Finder.com, any association with them, but they've been doing a great couple of posts recently where they've basically just gathered data from other sources, compiled it, put it all into one blog post, published it, and it actually ranks. And it's mainly because they're using they're putting together comprehensive blog posts using the data that already ranks and presenting it in new different ways using interactives and infographics. And just a quick mention as well, as mentioned with images, they're probably going to get stolen to an extent. Not necessarily stolen, but sometimes people just won't attribute. So you'll also have to monitor for unlinked brand mentions, where people are essentially referencing your data but not actually including a link. Google Alerts is a good way to do this. Just set up an alert for your own brand, and it'll notify you whenever you're mentioned. And the third and final method is responding to journal requests. That's all right. So again, this works because when journalists write about a specific topic, they might not always be qualified to give their opinion on the matter. So sometimes they need to reach out to people that they can use as credible sources, people with expertise or people with first-hand experience. So these are a couple of links that we managed to build for a client of ours. They do online doctors' services, and essentially what the journalists needed was essentially a quote from an expert doctor. So essentially we replied, and we managed to get a quote in sites like Metro or The Sun. It was basically a win-win situation. They get the expert quote, we get the link in the article. We use tools like Response Source. So with Response Source, essentially the way it works is the journalist or writer will be able to reach out to an audience through this platform. They put out the request for an expert on any particular topic. It can be absolutely anything, it varies. And essentially the platform allows you to contact the journalist or writer, and then essentially arrange to have a quote put into an article or whatever. And again, it's a win-win situation. Both benefit from it. Here's another example. And another platform that you can use, which is very similar as well, as Press Plugs. They're both pretty similar. The difference between them is Response Source generally allows you to sign up to one category. You can sign up to more, but then it becomes a bit more expensive. Press Plugs, you sign up to the entire platform. Allows you to access basically journalist requests in any field. You can just sift through them, find the one that you find relevant, contact them, and arrange a quote. And you can also use hashtag journal request on Twitter. So this is sort of cutting out the middleman in a way. Essentially, journalists and writers reach out directly on Twitter, requesting help on just about anything. And essentially all you have to do is get in contact with them when you see it, and try to turn around the quote as soon as possible. Just bear in mind they're usually on a timeline, on a restricted, tight deadline, sorry. So they usually need to turn around the information rather quickly. If you can be the first one to reply to it and give them the quote right away, then you're likely to guarantee a link. And basically, those are my 3 ways of link building, where essentially the idea with them is you produce your content, you distribute it, you give it the first little nudge, be it through outreach or Google Ads or whatever, and then essentially you can stop the active promotion and let them just go off and continue building links. And if there's nothing else that you take away from today, take away that you need to be diversifying. Don't rely on solely one method for link building. If tomorrow Google decides that it doesn't like one of them and you've only been link building, let's say, using roundups in the media, then you'll lose the lot. So diversify, use different methods. And that's me. Thank you very much. It kind of varies. It depends on what platform you use. We've been using most often Google surveys. That's based on essentially how many people answer it, as well as how many questions. So you can usually ask, let's say 2,000 people one question, or you can ask 2,000 people anywhere between 2 and 10 questions. I think generally it comes in at about, I think for the UK, again, it varies on your audience. So you could go for very generic and basically have pretty much any user in the UK. I think costs generally about 10p per question. I think it's then something like if you're trying to determine a certain, filter it down to a certain postal code or a certain age demographic or whatever, generally the price goes up a little bit. But I think it's between 2 and 10 question surveys for, I think it's per answer, it's about 40p for a very localized answer. So, yep.
I'm just wondering, when you're link building using a list request and Haro and things like that on behalf of clients, do you have like a bank of quotes ready to use? Like, what's your process? Do you contact the client to get the quotes? Like, because you're talking about speed.
Yes.
What your process is.
Yeah. To be honest, that's mostly what Stacey works on. It's kind of a case of you want to reply to it as quickly as possible, but it's more about seeing the request as quickly as possible. So keeping up to date with the hashtags and the different platforms. Generally, what tends to happen is when journalists reach out for the requests, they tend to be different for every article. So you can't really create a template or a platform that you could use. It's kind of customized to each individual one. But again, it's kind of a case of if you can get to it the first and kind of put somebody on it right away rather than saying, yeah, we'll get round to it in 2 days or 3 days' time, then they'll give you a sort of a preference.
I was just wondering, is it dependent on somebody else providing you that?
Yeah, of course. It's, yes.
I'll get back to you tomorrow. And you're like, no, that's too late.
Yeah,
Doing it for yourself is fine.
yeah.
It depends on
Yeah,
yourself.
exactly. The process is a little bit different in that one to the other 2 methods. The idea with it as well is that when you essentially create that quote and you get it on the website, generally what will tend to happen is that quote gets used once by, let's say, the Sun or Metro or whoever it is. What tends to happen is other people then writing about relevant statistics either quote you or then actually find out that you've been mentioned on Metro or the Sun or wherever it is and use the same link, so it continues to build links on its own. No worries. Yes, I haven't used it personally.
Because I mentioned Haro.
Yeah.
I have used Haro in the past. I get the emails for every single day. Only if I've got time. Generally, open the email, press Control and F, look for the particular word that you want to write about. If it's there, then great. If it's not, then ignore and wait till tomorrow.
Any other questions, Chris? We've got time for a couple more. I have a few actually.
Yeah.
So that could have like 6 minutes or a bit more.
Yes.
One of my sons did
Right.
Where I would imagine for journalists, very little journalists would like focus because there's not very much, not many statistics would like for how many things grows.
Well, generally, what we've found through doing all this link building is it's not necessarily restricted to the particular thing that you sell. So it might be, for example, staplers, but you can sort of expand to any office supplies or anything like that, use in day-to-day work. So it's like, for example, if you're creating imagery, you could start looking at the use of office supplies. So people using pencils and pens and whatnot, maybe using staplers. It doesn't have to be particularly the stapler. You can then start going off a little bit further. As long as it's roughly within the same industry, it tends to add more value to your link. If you go off on tangents and go off completely other industries, then it doesn't really provide the value that you want.